I was opening the cabin mail with Nora's old pocket knife when I saw my grandson's school district printed under a stranger's name. Not a wrong zip code, not junk mail, not one of those harmless little bureaucratic mix-ups a man can grumble over and toss aside with the grocery circulars. It was an electric bill addressed to Ellen Warren's service location, Lake Hollow Road, and beneath that in smaller type near the routing notation the district code for Evans Elementary School. For a second I sat there at my kitchen table with the blade still open in my hand and had the hard, cold feeling that comes when something ordinary has just corrected your life without asking permission. It was Tuesday night, a little after 7, and I had the house the way I liked it in November, lamps on before full dark, the furnace pushing up its dry heat in slow breaths, the old radio low in the den, with a man discussing weather patterns out west, as if weather had feelings and plans. My place in Dublin was too big for one man and too quiet after sundown, but I had learned the angles of that quiet over the 3 years since Nora died. There were worse things than quiet. There were phones that did not ring for reasons people did not explain. There were family conversations that got shorter month by month and made a man tell himself everybody was simply busy because the other explanation was harder to hold. I had a pot roast warming low in the oven. Carrots, onions. Potatoes enough for 4 because I still cooked as if arithmetic could be argued with. The smell of beef, black pepper, and thyme had worked itself into the kitchen walls the way it used to on Tuesdays when Nora was alive, and Claire brought Evan over after school, and Daniel stopped in on his way home from work, and there was noise enough in the house that a man had to raise his voice to ask for the salt. Now the sound in the room was the minute click of the wall clock over the pantry door and the dry paper whisper of envelopes sliding under my thumb. I read the bill again. Ellen Warren, Lake Hollow Road. The account number was the old cabin account. I knew it because I had paid it for 27 years, first by check, then online, then by check again after Nora died, because I had decided, for reasons that made sense only to grief, that certain bills ought to stay old-fashioned. Electric, propane, property tax. Men will tell themselves there is dignity in handling things. Sometimes there is. Sometimes it is only another way to keep from noticing what handling things has replaced. I set the pocket knife down on top of the utility bill and flattened the page with both hands. Below the mailing section was a service notation I did not understand at first. Numbers, letters, a root cross-reference, the sort of thing most people skip over because it looks like somebody else's problem. But I knew the school district code because I had once spent a week arguing with a transportation office over where Evan ought to be picked up during Claire and Mark's temporary move after a burst pipe in their first house. You remember strange things when you get old? Not always the names you want in the moment, but the codes, the road numbers, the address formats that once mattered to somebody you loved. I looked toward the window over the sink. The glass had gone black. My own reflection looked back at me, a broad-shouldered old man with more gray than I liked admitting, sleeves rolled, once reading glasses low on his nose, trying very hard not to feel afraid of an electric bill. The first thing I told myself was that Nora must have set something up years ago during treatment. Illness generates paperwork the way storms generate branches. Names get added. Alternate contacts are used. Systems are changed in a hurry and then forgotten. During the last year of her life, I had signed forms I could not recall signing and repeated birthdays and insurance numbers until they felt more intimate than prayer. It was possible, I told myself. Possible that Nora had used some old alias or a maiden name arrangement for a delivery service or a payment draft or God knew what else. Possible that the district notation was unrelated. Possible that I was doing what lonely men do when the house is warm and the evening is too still, finding shape in shadows, because shape feels better than blankness. Then I looked again at the mailing line beneath the stranger's name and saw printed in a block of smaller address data the transportation subaddress. Evan Harlan, not as the recipient, not directly, but there in the system notation buried the way only institutions bury the things they consider routine. I felt something go thin inside me. I picked up my phone and stared at Claire's name for a long moment before setting the phone back down. Claire and I still spoke, but not the way we once had. After Nora died, there had been a period of closeness that almost looked like healing from the outside. Claire stopped by more. She brought soup. She sorted some of Nora's clothes with me. Evan spent a few Saturdays in my den building those ridiculous little brick sets with Daniel, while I made grilled cheese and pretended I was not listening to how carefully my children were trying to keep me company. Then the closeness narrowed. Mark's job got busier. Claire got tired in that efficient way women get tired when they do not intend to invite comment. Visits moved around. Plans shortened. There was always a practical explanation. There usually is. I did not call her. Instead, I rose, checked the pot roast out of a habit rather than hunger, and then stood in front of the open oven, longer than I needed to, letting the heat come up against my face. The roast gave off that thick, savory smell that used to mean I was home in my life, not merely home in my house. Grease sputtered softly in the pan. The edges of the carrots had gone glossy. I closed the oven and wiped my hands on the towel Nora had hemmed herself years ago because she said store towels always gave up too early at the seams. I ate standing up at the counter and tasted almost nothing. By 8:30, I had the bill folded in my shirt pocket, the cabin key on the ring with the truck keys, and a list in my head of all the harmless reasons I might drive up to Lake Hollow in the morning. Check the heat lines. Make sure mice had not gotten into the insulation around the utility closet. See whether the roof had shed the last storm cleanly. A man my age does not need an exire to check on an old property in November. Still, I kept making them for myself as if excuses could prevent discovery. I slept poorly and woke at 4:15 to a dream I did not remember except for Nora's hands in it and the feeling that I had failed to catch something she had been trying to pass me. By 5, I was dressed. The morning had the particular Ohio cold that feels dry enough to ring. Not the wet knife edge that comes later in winter, but a hard November chill with stars still hanging above the subdivision and the lawns silvered over. I made coffee in the old enamel pot because I liked how long it took. While it brewed, I stood at the sink and looked out over the small backyard Nora had once filled with hostas and ferns, and those white impatiens she said could make even an ordinary place look as though it had been thought through kindly. The memory hit me there sudden and mean. One October, not long before she got sick enough that seasons began to matter in a different way. She had stood at that very sink peeling apples for a crisp and said almost absently, if Claire ever needed someplace quiet with the boy, the cabin would do him good. I had been rinsing mud off my boots after closing up the cabin for the season. Everybody does him good, I said. That kid's spoiled for people. Nora smiled in the window glass. That's not what I mean. I remember drying my hands on a towel and looking at her profile. She had a way of speaking sometimes that made a sentence feel like the second half of a conversation. What do you mean, then? She sliced an apple into careful crescent moons and lined them in the baking dish. Nothing, she said, just that some houses make it easier to breathe. At the time, I thought she was being Nora. Thought she meant the peace of the place, the lake, the slower air up there, the fact that Evan always slept like a stone after a day outdoors. I did not ask another question. Why would I, Claire and Mark, were still new enough as parents to look tired in the ordinary ways? Mark was attentive, organized, maybe a little too polished for my taste, but attentive. The worst thing I could have said about him then was that he answered questions a beat too fast and always seemed to know what everybody else meant before they finished saying it. At the sink that morning, coffee dripping behind me, I felt the shame of that memory settle where grief already lived. By 6, I was on the road. Lake Hollow sat a little under 2 hours northwest if traffic behaved itself. A narrow lake community that had once been mostly summer places and gradually turned into a patchwork of year-round homes, retirement cottages, and renovated properties for people who liked pretending they had discovered quiet. Nora and I had bought the cabin when Claire was 9 and Daniel 6. Back when I still believed the important decisions in life announced themselves clearly, it had been nothing fancy even then. Cedar-sided 1.5 stories stone chimney dock in need of work, kitchen too small for how she liked to cook. Nora walked in, touched the window over the sink and said, "This one." I spent the next 20 years learning that when your wife says this one in a certain tone, the wisest thing a man can do is check the septic and call the bank. The sun came up slow and pale over fields already cut back and blank as old paper. I kept the heater low and the bill on the seat beside me. Twice I reached over and touched it as if I needed to make sure it had not changed into something explainable while I was driving. The radio gave me farm reports, then old songs, then static. I turned it off. At 7:40, Daniel called. "You're up early," he said. He always sounded a little as if he had already moved through the day farther than the rest of us, even when he had just woken. He was a project manager for a commercial contractor in Columbus, now a job that kept him in steel-toed boots and behind schedules and talking to men who thought bluntness was a personality. He had Nora's steadiness and my face, which used to annoy him when he was younger, and seems to annoy him less now that he's old enough to know resemblance is mostly a debt you pay to time. "I'm on the road," I said. A beat of silence. "To the cabin." "Yes." He breathed out once. "You got the thing I texted you about?" "I got the bill." Another small silence, not empty this time. Measured. "You talked to Claire?" "Nah." He let that sit there a moment, then said too carefully, "Dad, if you go asking around up there, don't tell Mark first." The road narrowed by a line of sycamores stripped nearly bare. I felt my grip tighten on the wheel. "Why, I'm not saying don't talk to him. I'm saying don't start with him." "Daniel, I know. There are tones your children use when they are trying not to frighten you and end up frightening you more." He had one of them now. "What do you know?" I said. "Not enough," he said. "That's the problem. I'm probably reading too much into things. But Claire's been strange about that place for a long time, and every time I've asked anything direct, she gets vague in a way she doesn't usually get, unless Mark's somewhere in the frame." "What things?" "She used it, I think. Maybe more than she let on." "Used what?" "The cabin." I passed a gas station where Nora and I used to stop for coffee and cinnamon rolls when the kids were small, and for a second I saw her there in memory, mittened hands around a paper cup. Hair coming loose under a knit hat, smiling at me, because I had gotten powdered sugar on my coat. Then the image vanished, and I was back inside the truck with Daniel's voice in my ear and the wrongness pressing down harder. "Claire told me that place had been shut up since your mother died," I said. "I know." "Then why are you saying this like you've known something I haven't?" "I haven't known it. I've suspected it." "There's a difference." "Suspected what?" "That Claire's had reasons for not telling us things." "Us." "Not me." "Us." It pricked. "What kind of reasons?" I asked. "I don't know yet." "Daniel." He exhaled again, impatient with himself this time. "I'm trying to be careful." "Careful with who?" "With you." "With Claire." "With not blowing up half the family over a feeling I can't prove." I looked out at the fields, the drainage ditches silver with frost, the utility lines walking beside the road. "You should have called me sooner." "Sooner than what, an hour after you opened the build ad?" "I didn't know you had it till you sent the photo." "That was fair, and landed hard because it was fair." "All right," I said. "All right. I'm going up there. I'll look around, then I'll call you. Don't call Claire from the driveway if you find something weird," he said. "Just look first." "Why?" Because if there's an explanation, you'll have one. And if there isn't, you'll know what question to ask." I almost told him that fathers do not much enjoy being advised by sons on how to proceed with their own daughters. But there was nothing petty in him this morning. Only worry. I heard it then. "All right," I said again. "Dad." "Yes. If the place feels wrong, trust that." The line went quiet after that, but his last sentence rode with me the rest of the way like a passenger I had not invited. The lane down to the cabin was rutted at the shoulder where last week's rain had chewed it up. Oaks crowded the bend. The lake flashed between trunks gray-blue and flat as metal. When the cabin first came into view, I had the brief, foolish relief a man feels when a building appears exactly where it ought to be. Cedar siding weathered darker now, green trim faded, chimney still straight, porch railing in one piece. It sat there with the same modest, self-contained look it had always had, as if nothing dramatic could happen inside a house too busy minding its own business. I parked by the woodshed and killed the engine. The silence after the truck shut off was deep enough to hear a woodpecker somewhere across the water. I stayed seated a moment, hands on the wheel, looking at the place. The cabin had never frightened me. It had never even made me uneasy. Not once. It was the only property I have ever owned that felt like it liked us back. Nora used to laugh when I said that, but she knew what I meant. Some houses resist the people in them, no matter how much paint labor or money you pour at them. This place had always taken us in. The kids grew straight inside its rooms. Nora's soups tasted better there. Rain on the roof made you feel richer than you were. Even grief, the handful of times I brought it there after she died, had lain down more quietly. I got out and crossed the gravel. The front porch boards gave the same old shallow complaint under my boots. I unlocked the door. The air that met me was cold, cedar old dust lake damp, held at bay, and beneath it, something faintly sweet and clean that did not belong to the cabin closed up for the season. Laundry detergent. I stood still with the key in the lock and that scent just touching the edge of my recognition. Nora never used scented detergent, said cabins ought to smell like wood smoke, coffee dish soap, and weather-not flowers pretending to be clean. I opened the door wider. The living room was as I remembered it, which unsettled me more than if it had been obviously disturbed. Braided rug by the stone hearth. Sofa with the patched arm Nora used to cover with a throw when company came. 2 rush-bottom chairs. The narrow bookshelf Daniel built in high school still leaning a little because he had insisted it was level when it plainly was not. Everything held the shape of itself, but houses can be arranged correctly and still feel altered. The first sign was not visual. It was the temperature of use. Not warmth, exactly. The sense of recent occupation that lives in air and fibers, and the way a room receives you. People who do not pay attention will call that imagination. People who have spent 40 years walking into the same rooms know better. I set my overnight bag by the chair, closed the door, and moved toward the mudroom. That was where the wrongness sharpened. The bench under the hooks had a dull crescent of fresh scuffing on the floorboards below it, narrow and repeated as if boots smaller than adult men's had been kicked off there many times lately. One of the lower hooks had rubbed a clean little half-moon in the dustless wood. Nora used to hang Evan's coat there when he was little enough that he could not reach. The woven tray on the shelf held a flashlight, a pair of work gloves, and a knit hat with navy stripes folded under itself as if set down in a hurry. I picked up the hat. Child's size. Not new. The inside tag had gone soft with washing. It smelled faintly of cold air and soap. Evan had a head full of dark hair that never stayed flat. I had bought him a navy-striped cap, not unlike this one, 2 Christmases ago, maybe 3. I stood there, turning it over in my hands, trying to decide whether recognizing a child's winter hat counted as evidence of anything except age. Probably nothing I said aloud, and the sound of my own voice in that room made me feel more alone, not less. I put the hat back exactly where I had found it and went into the kitchen. The west window table sat in its place, and on it exactly where Nora kept it was the carved loon music box. For a moment I simply looked at it. Black body, white throat, small lurid eye, carved years ago by a man up near Sandusky who sold bird boxes and duck decoys out of a barn. Nora had bought it on impulse because the call was close enough to a loon to please her and soft enough not to annoy me. That was her phrase. Close enough to please me, soft enough not to annoy you. She used to wind it on rainy afternoons when the kids were doing puzzles, or when Evan, as a little boy, got himself worked up into one of those breathless, overtired spells children have when they want to be brave and are not yet built for it. The box was there. But wrong, not much. turned a little too square to the table edge. Nora always kept it angled toward the window as if the bird were listening to the lake. A foolish thing to know? A worse thing not to be able to stop knowing. I reached out and touched the smooth carved back. Cold. I had the strange impulse to apologize to it. Instead, I glanced around the kitchen for other signs of intrusion and found none dramatic. Dish towels folded, crock of wooden spoons by the stove, salt cellar on the right of the range where Nora liked it. But when I opened the pantry door, the cold that ran through me had less to do with fear than recognition. The shelves had been stocked and rotated, not abundantly, not in a way that would have struck a stranger as sinister, but enough. Tomato soup fronted in twos, broth cartons newer than they ought to be, saltines, powdered cocoa, oatmeal packets, peanut butter, shelf-stable milk. The lower basket of onions had been refreshed recently, and the labels on the canned goods were turned outward in Nora's old sequence soups, together by kind, then vegetables, then pantry standbys for storm days. Grief does not rotate stock. I stood there with the pantry door open and the smell of cardboard, onion skin, cedar shelf paper, and old wood coming up around me. And I understood for the first time that I was no longer checking a property. I was standing inside somebody else's kept arrangement. I found myself counting dates. Some of the goods were recent. Not yesterday recent, but not 3 years empty recent either. I crouched and pulled out the crate where Nora used to keep paper towels and matchbooks. Behind it sat a plastic packet of powdered hot chocolate in a brand she never bought because she said it tasted like sweetened chalk. Claire bought that brand, had for years, said Evan liked it better. I straightened too quickly and had to put a hand on the shelf until the blood settled. The kitchen sink window looked out over the slope to the lake. Gray water, bare branches, dock floating low. The same view Nora had looked at 1,000 times, while washing dishes, or waiting for a pie to cool, or staring into a thought she had not yet decided to share. I remembered her there one February in a thick cardigan, sleeves shoved up, talking to Evan while he colored at the table. If the weather turns rough, she had told him, you come right inside and sit by the heater, no pretending you're tougher than cold. I am tougher than cold, he had said, all of 6 and full of nonsense. No, she said, smiling down at him. You're a boy. Different species. He laughed so hard at that he snorted milk. In the present in the kitchen, I suddenly saw the memory bent another way. Not just grandmotherly fussing, not just weather. The possibility of more. I hated myself for letting it in, and hated myself worse for not having let it in sooner. I went to the utility closet and found the service tags. The heat had been checked more recently than I remembered authorizing. The propane notation on the side ledger had a date from last winter. I stared at it a long while, then pulled my phone and scrolled through my account history. There were payments I had made, yes, but also 1 or 2 credit adjustments I had never looked at closely. The sort of little administrative smoothing a man ignores because life is already full of enough corners. I should have called somebody then. Daniel, Claire, the utility company. Instead, I kept moving room to room the way men do when they suspect the next doorway might explain the last one. The upstairs bedroom still smelled faintly of cedar sachets from Nora's dresser drawers. That hit me hard enough that I had to sit on the edge of the bed. Her side of the room remained hers in some silly old-fashioned way I had never corrected. The lamp she liked, the folded quilt at the foot, a brush in the top drawer, tangled with 3 strands of pale silver hair I could never make myself throw away. I sat there looking at the brush and knew with complete certainty that if Nora had built some arrangement in this house, without telling me she had done it while still brushing her hair at this mirror, still sleeping 3 feet from me, still reaching across in the night when my shoulder ached and pressing her palm between my shoulder blades until I fell back asleep. That was the pain of it. Not that she might have acted. Nora acted all the time. On small things, on practical things, on things that kept a family from slowly coming apart around the edges. The pain was that she might have acted alone. I stood again and made myself keep moving. The back room had once been Claire and Daniel's shared room when they were small, then Evan's room once he came along. Nora had started calling it the storm room after one July thunderstorm sent him crying from the loft. "We'll put him in the back room," she said. "Less window, less fuss, better for storms." The name stuck. I opened the door. A small twin bed under the far wall. Blue quilt, shelf of old books. Framed watercolor of the lake Nora bought at a church sale because she said the painter had gotten the sky wrong in a tender way. The room looked tidy enough to pass at a glance. Preserved. A little stale. Then I smelled the detergent again, clearer here. Not stale at all. I moved to the bed and pressed the quilt with my palm. Recently washed. Or not recently exactly, but not old enough to carry the shut-up scent the rest of the room should have had. On the shelf above the bed sat 3 paperback adventure novels that belonged to Evan. 2 birthdays ago, not the older children's books Nora used to keep here for company. In the nightstand drawer, I found a half-used packet of tissues, 2 crayons without wrappers, and 1 smooth lake stone with a face drawn on it in black marker. Nora used to do that with him when rain trapped them indoors. Worry stones, she called them. Everybody deserves something smooth to hold. My mouth had gone dry. I turned to leave, and that was when I saw the pencil marks on the doorframe. Nora used to mark the children there at the end of every summer. Date initials, little line, no sentiment made of it, because she believed sentiment did better when you let it sneak up on you. Claire at 9, Daniel at 7, Evan at 4, 5, 6 small jumps, then bigger ones. I had not looked at that frame in years. The latest mark sat just above the one from the summer before Nora died. Evan 10. And beside it in Nora's hand, Num. Not Nora's. Someone trying to copy her block letters and not quite getting the slope of the N. Then the date. 2 winters after Nora was buried. I stood there with my hand on that door frame and felt the room move a little around me, not physically but in meaning. The cabin had not been empty. Not after Nora. Not maybe once or twice for some harmless reason. Somebody had brought my grandson here, measured him against the wall where Nora had once stood, and dated the moment in a hand that wanted to look ordinary. For a long time I did not move. Then I took out my phone and photographed the mark, though my hand shook enough that the first picture blurred. When I raised my head again, the room no longer looked like a preserved child's room. It looked used. Carefully, quietly, repeatedly. And whoever had done it had expected with some confidence that I would go on believing grief was the reason nobody came here anymore. I stared at the date until the numbers stopped looking like numbers and started looking like accusation. That was where the first part of my life ended, there in the back room of my own family cabin with my dead wife's house around me and my grandson's growth marked on the wall. In a year, he was never supposed to have been there. I must have stood in that doorway for 5 full minutes, with my phone still in my hand, before I did the one sensible thing available to me. I called Daniel. He picked up on the second ring. "You there? I'm in the back room." That was all I said, and he must have heard something in my voice, because his own changed immediately. "What did you find?" I looked at the pencil mark again. The line was faintly crooked. The letters sat on the wood with too much care, as though whoever had written them had been trying to recreate the feeling of an old family habit instead of simply recording a child's height. That was what turned my stomach the most. Not just that Evan had been here after Nora died, that somebody had wanted the mark to look natural. "There's a height mark on the doorframe," I said. "Evan. Dated 2 winters after your mother passed." He did not answer right away. Then he said quietly, "Are you sure, yes? Is it Mom's handwriting now?" That quiet again, but different now. No caution in it, no carefulness, just the sound of one adult man trying to decide how fast to let fear become action. "I'm coming," he said. "You're at work. I don't care." "You should care," I said, "because fathers keep playing their parts even after the script has changed. I don't know what I've found yet. You know enough." I looked around the room. Small bed, blue quilt, paperbacks, the drawn face on the worry stone. The place was so tidy it might have passed for love if I had not been standing in the middle of its lie. "Bring whatever you've got from that bill," Daniel said, "and don't call Claire yet. You keep saying that, because if she's hiding something and it's not just from you, I want to know how she behaves before she has time to decide what story to tell. She's your sister. I know exactly who she is." There was no hardness in the way he said it. That almost made it worse. "I'll wait," I said. When I hung up, I stayed where I was a moment longer, and then did what I had always done when the world began to feel less manageable than it had 5 minutes earlier. I worked. I went room by room with my phone and photographed what did not fit the story I had been living inside. The striped knit cap in the mudroom, the fresh clean arc on the lower coat hook, the pantry shelves stocked with things Nora had always considered storm food soup broth, crackers, cocoa, shelf-stable milk. The receipt clipped to the utility ledger in the closet showing a propane service check from January of last year. The box of oatmeal packets Claire bought for Evan because he disliked the lumpy kind Nora preferred. The newer quilt in the back room, the tissue packet, the crayons, the worry stone. Working steadied my hands, but it did nothing for the feeling building underneath my ribs. By 10:30, the cabin had gone from remembered place to evidence. That was when I noticed the desk alcove. Nora had claimed that little built-in nook by the west window almost from the day we bought the place. The desk itself was old knotty pine attached crookedly to the wall with 3 narrow drawers that stuck in humid weather, and a shelf above where she kept Field Guide's old recipe cards and a little brass weather barometer she trusted more than the television. The desk had never been important to anyone else in the family, which meant if something had been kept there, it would likely have stayed kept. I sat down in Nora's chair. The cushion gave with that same familiar small sigh, and for one stupid second I almost called her name. That happened to me less often now. In the first year after she died, I said her name into rooms constantly, as if the house and I had made some misunderstanding and needed it corrected. By the 3rd year, I had graduated to silence, which people probably took for improvement. The top drawer held what it always had: pencils, spare batteries, 2 twist ties, a tiny screwdriver, a folded campground map from 2009. The middle drawer stuck halfway. I tugged harder, and it came free with a wood-on-wood groan that sounded so normal it made the rest of the morning feel briefly insane. Inside were recipe cards, a flashlight manual, and a stack of old utility stubs bound with a rubber band, gone brittle enough to snap when I touched it. The bottom drawer was deeper. At first glance, it looked empty except for a yellow legal pad and some envelopes. Then I saw the envelopes were all from Lakeside Market. I pulled them out. Delivery invoices, not just one. Several. Different dates across winter months. Milk, soup, sandwich, bread, applesauce, cups, crackers, cocoa, mixed ginger lozenges, bottled water, bananas. Not extravagant groceries, not weekend groceries for a whole family. The kind of order a woman might make if she expected a child and an adult to arrive tired cold and maybe too upset to want a full meal. The paper in my hand had gone thin with age and drawer dryness. I checked the first date. 11 months after Nora died. The 2nd. 14 months. The 3rd. Nearly 2 years, all delivered to Lake Hollow Road. I leaned back in the chair and let my head rest once against the wall behind me. Ginger lozenges. I could see Nora buying them in my mind so clearly it almost hurt to breathe. She always kept them for scratchy throats, car sickness, and what she called frayed-up children. That last category included ordinary fussing fevers, thunderstorm nerves, and any mood she believed was caused by too much adult energy pressing in on a child at once. She swore by ginger and warm milk in cases where other people swore by discipline or reason. I had once laughed at her for that. Not unkindly, but I had laughed. It came back to me whole and unwelcome. Evan, at 7, flushed and overtired in the living room at the cabin after a long summer day, tears starting for no reason he could explain. Mark had been in the doorway watching with that mild, patient expression he wore when children disappointed him by being children. "He's fine," Mark said. "He just needs to settle down." Nora, already in the kitchen with the kettle, answered without turning around. "No, he needs to be helped down." It was such a small difference in language I hardly noticed it at the time. One of 1,000 little family moments. Mark had smiled in that tight, courteous way and said, "Same destination." "No," Nora said. "Not the same road." I remember standing by the hearth, pretending to straighten a poker set while the two of them looked at each other across the room. Claire had been gathering books off the floor too quickly. Evan had hidden his face against the sofa cushion. Then Nora came back with warm milk and one ginger lozenge broken into a saucer because she said whole lozenges made children feel managed, and the moment passed. At least I had thought it passed. Sitting at the desk now with the invoices in my hand, I understood that some moments do not pass. They go quiet and wait. I heard Daniel's truck in the drive a little before noon. He came in carrying the cold with him, tall and dark-coated hair, wind-blown jaw, set in a way that was too much mine for comfort. He looked around the kitchen once fast and then at me. "You haven't called anyone?" "No." He nodded as though I had passed some test I did not know I was taking. Then his eyes fell to the invoices spread beside me. "What's that lakeside market?" He took one, read it, then another. His face did not change much, but the space around him did. "Some people flare when frightened." Daniel narrowed. "They delivered here after Mom died." "Yes." "More than once." "Yes." He set the papers down carefully. "Did you know about this account number? Could Claire have set it up?" "Possibly." He glanced toward the back room. "Did you photograph the mark?" I handed him my phone. He studied the picture and swore under his breath. "Not loudly, just once." "I know," I said. "That's not Mom's lettering." "No." He gave the phone back and walked into the mudroom. I heard him moving around, opening the utility closet, coming back into the pantry, pausing longer than I expected at the lower shelves. He was not as intuitive about houses as Nora and I had always been, but he understood systems, and this place was beginning to reveal itself as one. When he came back to the table, he tapped 2 fingers against the wood, the habit he had when fitting a thought into language. "Let me ask you something," he said. "When did you last come up here before today?" "March." "Briefly. To check the roof after that heavy wind. You went inside?" "Of course I went inside." "And you noticed none of this?" I looked at him. He must have heard the answer in my silence because his expression softened. "I'm not taking a shot at you. I know what you're asking. What am I asking?" I looked down at the delivery slips, whether I missed it because I didn't want to see it. He did not answer. That was answer enough. "I came up in March," I said. "Checked the place. Heat was low. Water line fine. Looked around. It all fit. Or I let it fit." "Did Claire know you were coming then?" "I don't remember." "That matters." "Everything matters now," I said, and heard bitterness in my voice. I had not earned the right to indulge yet. Daniel pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down. For a moment we looked at the same papers, the way men sometimes do when neither wants to be the first to shape the uglier thought. Finally, he said, "I told you on the phone I've suspected things." "You said that. I didn't mean an affair or money or anything stupid like that. I mean control." The words sat there between us. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock over the pantry door. Outside, a gust moved over the lake and rattled the dry oak leaves that had piled against the porch skirting. "Control how?" I asked. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "You know how Mark is. I know how he presents. He answers for people. That's not a crime." "No, but it isn't nothing either." I wanted to tell him he was making a case out of irritation. That half the men in America of a certain generation answered for their wives more than they should, and nobody built a secret winter grocery system over it. But the words would not come. Not with the pantry behind me, and the height mark down the hall and the invoices under my hand. Daniel looked toward the west window. 2 years ago, he said, I stopped by Claire's place on a Sunday because I was nearby and thought I'd take Evan to lunch. Mark told me they were out. I said fine, I'd come back later. Then on the way out, I saw Claire's car wasn't gone. I felt my neck tighten. You ever tell me this? Number why? He looked at me then, not sharply, just steadily. Because you had Mom in hospice that month, and I did not think at the time that me feeling weird in a driveway outranked the rest of what was happening to you. I sat back. That was fair, too. Today seemed intent on handing me fair things that hurt like accusations. What happened? I asked. Nothing. That's the thing. I rang the bell again. Claire came to the door. She said Evan was asleep and she was tired and it wasn't a good time. She looked... He paused. Not scared exactly. Careful, like she was answering a question I hadn't asked right. Did you ask later? Yes. She brushed it off. I stared at the music box on the table. The little carved loon faced slightly too square to the edge, and the wrongness of that angle had begun to bother me in a way that felt absurd. I wanted to turn it back the way Nora kept it. I also did not want to touch it again until I understood why it felt altered. You think she used the cabin to get away from him, I said. I think she used the cabin for something she didn't tell us. That's not the same thing. No, Daniel said. It isn't. He was right. Again. The not knowing was the worst part. Not because uncertainty is inherently painful, because uncertainty permits a man to go on preserving the version of his life he prefers. Each fact I found was shrinking that permission. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and took out a slim legal pad. On it, he had already written the bill details I texted him that morning, the account number, the delivery dates from the photos, the propane service tag. My son was building order out of chaos the way I normally did. It unsettled me to be on the receiving end of it. I called someone on the drive up, he said. Who, Linda Kessler? The name took me a moment. Then I placed her. She had worked transportation compliance for the school district years back when Claire first moved into the Harlan place. Sharp woman, serious face. The kind of person who knew every county line bus route and duplicate address in a 30-mile radius without ever seeming proud of it. Why? Because if that code on the bill means what we think it means, she'll know. And she called me back right before I got here. She's retired from the district, but she consults now. She said if the route notation is attached to a cabin area service address, that's not normal. Not impossible, but not normal. What does that mean? It means somebody used that address or a related stop as an active transportation reference. I felt the words before I fully understood them. Active, I said. Yeah. For school. Yeah. I rose from the table and walked to the sink because I could not sit still another second. The lake beyond the window had darkened under a sheet of afternoon cloud. The dock floated low and harmless. A pair of geese moved close to shore. Everything outside remained exactly what it had always been, and inside the room, my whole understanding of the last 3 years kept inching sideways. Behind me, Daniel said, She'll talk to us. Here, no. There's a coffee place in town she uses when she comes up this way. 1:30. I turned. You arranged that already. I thought you'd want facts. I almost said I wanted my wife back, my daughter honest, my grandson out of any sentence involving alternate transportation references and stranger names. Instead, I nodded. We left the cabin locked and took my truck into town. The coffee place sat on Main, just off the hardware store, narrow and warm, with old plank floors and the smell of cinnamon rolls trying too hard to matter. Linda Kessler was already there at a table in the back gray blazer, reading glasses on a chain legal folder squared precisely in front of her. She had always looked as though she had been ironed that morning. She rose when we approached, shook my hand, nodded to Daniel, and sat again. Mr. Avery, she said. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. That phrase irritated me on sight. under these circumstances. As if circumstances were rain and we were unlucky pedestrians. But I knew she meant kindness and not evasion. Daniel gave her the bill copy and his notes. She looked them over without hurry. "This code here," she said, touching the corner with one neat fingernail, "is not a child's name attached to a utility. That would be impossible. It's a routing cross-reference. Usually it appears when a service address is tied to a transportation verification request or alternate stop documentation." "In plain English," I said. She met my eyes. "In plain English, someone needed that address in the orbit of your grandson's school transportation arrangements." The room around us seemed to go very quiet, though the front counter was still grinding beans and a woman in a red scarf was laughing too loudly at something on her phone. "For how long?" Daniel asked. Linda lifted one shoulder. "Without current district access, I cannot pull the full history. But if the code is embedded in this type of billing record, the linkage was not incidental. It was entered verified and reused enough to leave an imprint." "Could it be temporary?" I said. "Anything can be temporary. Temporary does not mean accidental." I looked at the table between us. The wood had been varnished, too glossy, and in the shine I could see the blurred reflection of my hands. "Would a child need this if he was only visiting a place occasionally?" I asked. "Not usually." She folded her hands. "Alternate transportation paperwork exists because children must be picked up and dropped off from approved locations. If a family uses a second address consistently enough, schools want it documented." "Consistently," Daniel repeated. "Yes." The cinnamon smell in the room turned my stomach. Linda did not press. She gave facts the way good professionals do without pretending they are less than they are. I cleared my throat. "And the stranger's name. That could be an alias, a caretaker, a relative. Someone functioning as a responsible adult contact. I can't say from this alone. Would the district accept that if properly presented? Districts accept many things. The question is not whether paperwork can be made tidy. It is what family reality required it." There it was. Quietly said. Worse for being quiet. Daniel asked a few more technical questions. How many alternate stops were usually permitted? Whether a lake address would have created review flags? Whether archived records might still exist? Linda answered carefully. No drama, no overreach, but every answer narrowed the hallway I had been trying to walk down toward harmlessness. At last, she said, "Mr. Avery, I don't know your family, but children do not usually acquire structured second address transportation unless the adults around them are living 2 stories at once." I looked at her, then really looked at her and saw no appetite in her face for alarm or gossip. Only the weariness of a woman who had spent too many years watching clean forms hide messy homes. "Thank you," I said. She nodded once. "If you need me to confirm what this code pattern indicates in writing, I will." When she left, Daniel and I sat at the table a while without speaking. I found myself remembering another school morning years back. Evan still small enough that his backpack looked like a shell on him. Nora had been at our house because Claire needed help after a dental procedure. I came downstairs and found Nora standing at the front window watching the Harlins' driveway across the street in the rain. "What are you doing?" I had asked. "Timing," she said. "Timing what?" She didn't answer at first. Then she turned, picked up Evan's dropped mitten from the floor and said, "How long it takes a child to be told to hurry before hurrying turns into fear." I laughed, then lightly, not unkindly because the sentence sounded like Nora in one of her hyper-attentive moods. "It's 8 in the morning," I said. "Everybody's afraid." But she had not smiled. Now 3 years too late, and 1 coffee shop table too late, I understood that she had been measuring more than mornings. We drove back to the cabin in silence. When we turned into the lane, a dark SUV was parked by the woodshed. For a second, every part of me went cold at once. Then I saw Claire get out. She stood by the driver's door with her arms folded tight under the coat she had bought after Nora's funeral, a long black wool thing that always made her look more formal than she was. My daughter had Nora's mouth and my shoulders. Right then she looked like somebody who had driven somewhere with both hands locked on the wheel the whole way. Daniel muttered, "Damn it." You called her no. I parked behind her and got out. The air had turned sharper. You could smell water and leaves and that iron smell. November gets just before dark. Claire looked from me to Daniel and back. "You went to Linda Kessler," she said. So that was how fast news moved. Or maybe Linda had warned her. Or maybe Claire had guessed. These were the sort of calculations I had not wanted to make about my own daughter. "I did," Daniel said. Claire's gaze cut to him. "That wasn't your call." "No," he said. "It was Dad's. I arranged it." She gave a humorless little laugh that sounded almost like a cough. "Of course you did." I watched her for a moment before speaking. Her eyes looked tired, not red from crying, not wild, not dramatic. Just tired in the deep cellular way I'd been seeing in her for years and apparently naming as adulthood because that was easier than asking what kind. "Why is Evan's school district tied to the cabin electric?" I said. She closed her eyes once. That was not the response of a woman hearing nonsense for the first time. It was the response of a woman meeting something she had hoped to postpone. "Dad," she said quietly, "not out here." Daniel made an impatient sound. "You don't get to set terms now." She turned on him. "I am trying not to do this in a driveway. Then do it inside." I said her name. Just once. That was enough to stop both of them, though, not because I raised my voice. I almost never had to. Nora used to say the children obeyed me quickest when I sounded the most tired. We went into the cabin. The moment Claire stepped through the mudroom, she glanced automatically toward the lower hook where the knit cap had been. A small thing, but I saw it. Daniel saw it too. Her eyes moved next to the striped tray that benched the utility closet. Not as a visitor's would. As someone orienting herself inside a known system. I hated the relief that gave me. Hated that certainty, even partial, could feel like comfort. In the kitchen, she stood with one hand on the chair back and looked at the west window table. Her eyes landed on the music box and stayed there a fraction too long. "You shouldn't have opened things," she said. I laughed once. Couldn't help it. Opened things, the drawers, the room, everything. This is my house. It was Mom's too. The past tense lodged in me like a splinter. "Yes," I said. "And your mother is dead, Claire, which means she is not available to explain why my grandson's school routing is buried in a stranger's utility bill for a cabin you told me had been empty for years." She gripped the chair harder. Daniel stood by the pantry door with his arms crossed. He did not interrupt. That was unlike him and therefore more ominous. Claire looked at me with that same carefulness Daniel had named on the phone. Not fear, exactly. Precision. She had been living a long time in sentences chosen for survivability. It wasn't empty all the time, she said. I felt every muscle in my body go still. How much time, I asked. She looked down. Sometimes in winter, sometimes other times. "Who was here?" She swallowed. "Me. Evan. Mark." No answer. "Claire." "Sometimes." The room seemed to tilt without moving. Daniel spoke at last. "Did he know?" She did not look at him. "Yes." "Did he approve?" Her mouth tightened. "That's not the right word." No, I thought. No, it was not. I pulled out a chair and sat, because I did not trust myself standing, not from temper, from the feeling that if I remained on my feet, something in me would either strike the table or go out like a fuse. "You're going to tell me everything I said, or as much of everything as you are capable of right now." Claire kept her hand on the chair back. "I can't do all of it at once." "You'd better start." Her eyes moved to the music box again. When she was 12 and had lied about staying at a friend's house instead of going to the river with a boy, I had told her twice not to trust. She had stared at the salt cellar this same way while deciding which parts of the truth were survivable. I had almost forgotten that. Funny what returns when a room asks enough of you. It started before Mom got sick, she said. Not the cabin exactly, just her noticing things. What things Claire's fingers found her wedding ring and twisted it once. Timing, she said. The word struck me like a hand to the chest because it was Nora's word too. What timing everything? How long it took Mark to answer if he was crossed. How fast he could switch from calm to... She stopped. To what? She let out a breath. To making the whole house feel like it had narrowed. Daniel shifted by the pantry but did not speak. Your mother told you that I asked. She asked questions. What kind of questions? Claire gave a small broken shrug. Whether I still felt like my own thoughts belonged to me by the end of the day. Whether Evan got quieter after Mark came home or before. Whether I ever changed what I was going to say halfway through saying it. No one moved. The clock over the pantry door ticked. The heater clicked once. Somewhere outside a branch scraped lightly along the siding in the wind. And what did you tell her? I asked. Claire laughed again, that same sad sound. What women tell their mothers when they want not to be a problem. That marriage is hard sometimes. That Mark was stressed. That I was tired. That Evan was sensitive. That nothing dramatic had happened. Had it? She looked at me then, not through me, not around me. At me. Do you need it to have been dramatic? The question went through me clean and deep because I knew at once what she meant. Men like me. Men of my age, my training, my habits. We wait for a slammed door, a bruise, a shattered plate, a shouted threat. We call that seriousness because seriousness comes easiest when it announces itself in damage we recognize. I did not answer. Claire lowered herself slowly into the chair opposite me. Mom didn't either, she said. That's the point. She didn't need drama. Daniel looked away at the window. I found that my hands had closed on the table edge hard enough to ache. Why the cabin? I asked. Claire's face changed then, not dramatically, but enough. Something in it gave. Not to tears, to tiredness older than her years. Because it was quiet, she said. I waited. Because Evan slept here. The room went so still I could hear the sound of my own breath in my nose. What he slept here, through the night, deep, like a kid. She looked down at the table. At home he listened all the time, even in his sleep. Daniel said very softly. Claire. She kept going as if she had heard nothing. Mom said some houses make children unclench. She said if he ever needed that, this place would do it. I felt suddenly sick with memory. Nora at the sink peeling apples. Nora saying some houses make it easier to breathe. Nora standing at the front window timing mornings. Nora breaking a ginger lozenge in half because whole ones made children feel managed. All of it sliding out of the category of personality and into the category of warning. I looked at the music box. What was that for? I asked. Claire followed my eyes. Mom used it when he woke up scared. Scared of what? She pressed her lips together. I heard Daniel move behind me. Not much, just enough to remind me he was still there and hearing every word I wished he did not have to hear. Claire. He said the house talked too loud when Mark was in one of his moods, she said. The sentence landed in me with a force out of all proportion to its volume. Moods, I repeated. He didn't hit him. She said it immediately, too immediately, as if bracing for the question before I voiced it. That's not what this is. I closed my eyes once. When I opened them, the kitchen had changed. Not physically, but the chairs, the pantry, the sink, the little weather barometer above the desk. All of it now belonged to a different arrangement of truth than the one I had inhabited this morning. Then what is it? I asked. Claire looked exhausted clear through. It's never getting to finish a sentence without being corrected. It's being told what you meant before you know what you meant. It's every room feeling like somebody else is holding the emotional thermostat. It's Evan getting so quiet by bedtime that Mom noticed before I let myself. No one spoke. The wind scraped the siding again. The heater clicked, the smell of cedar and old coffee and the clean floral detergent I still hated drifted through the kitchen. At last, I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes filled, then not overflowing, just filling. "Mom said you'd want certainty." It was the cruelest thing anyone could have said to me because it was true enough to wound and untrue enough to be unbearable. She said that. Claire nodded. "Whenever time." What exactly did she say? Claire wiped once under one eye with the side of her thumb, impatient with herself. That you loved hard and fair, and you would stand in front of a train for any of us. But before you blew up a family, you'd need the thing in your hands. The undeniable thing. And by the time we had that, she didn't know what shape any of us would be in. I looked down at the table because I could not keep looking at my daughter and remain composed. The grain of the wood had darkened where years of hot dishes and damp glasses had touched it. Near the music box was a pale water ring I remembered from a rainy spring Sunday when Nora forgot to use a coaster because Evan had come in crying over a dead turtle by the dock, and she was trying to comfort him while making grilled cheese for 3 people at once. At the time I had teased her for the ring. She had kissed my cheek and said, "A table that shows you." It was lived at. Is not a damaged table. I put my hand flat on that ring now and thought not for the first time that day that I had mistaken preservation for care. Daniel spoke then, voice low and tight. "Did Mom prepare this place?" Claire did not answer right away. Then she nodded. "How much?" he asked, a little at first, then more. "What does that mean?" It means she started keeping certain things here on purpose. Things Evan liked, things that soothed him, a duplicate backpack once, extra socks, cocoa, batteries, a prepaid phone. Claire swallowed. Then after she got sick, she made lists. That last word seemed to drain the room of air. "What lists?" I said. Claire shook her head at once. "I don't know where everything is." Everything. The word lodged. Everything. There are moments when a man's old life does not explode. It peels back. Quietly. You see the framework behind it and understand that the visible rooms were never the whole house. That was what was happening to me there at my own table with my own children and my dead wife's music box sitting between us like a witness. "Show me what you do know," I said. Claire stood slowly. Her knees seemed stiff. She moved not to the desk, not to the pantry, but to the lower cupboard by the stove, where Nora kept baking pans. Claire knelt, slid the roasting pan stack aside, and reached behind it. When she turned back, she held one of Nora's old recipe envelopes. My whole body tightened. The envelope was cream-colored edges, softened from use, soups/winter, written across the front in Nora's round block print. But the thickness of it was wrong, too stiff for recipe cards alone. Claire set it on the table and looked at me like a woman approaching a live wire. Inside were not recipes. There were 2 bus route slips folded small. A pharmacy pickup stub from a location 15 miles from Claire's house, but only 6 from the cabin. And a handwritten card in Nora's unmistakable script. Not a letter, not a confession, just instructions. Plain domestic practical. If Evan wakes, frightened. Warm milk first, 1/2 ginger lozenge if throat tight music box. Once not twice let him talk crooked until it straightens out. Do not correct the order of what he says. Blanket from back room, closet, not linen. Chest. I stared at the card until the words blurred. Not because they were dramatic, because they were not. This was not a dead woman's revelation. It was a grandmother's procedure, a routine, a system so ordinary in its kindness that it made the need for it monstrous. I heard my own voice come out rougher than I intended. She wrote this. Yes, Claire whispered. When? After the first time Evan woke up here shaking so hard he couldn't swallow. I looked up. Daniel had gone very pale. "Why was he here?" I asked. Claire's face crumpled only slightly, but enough. "Because he slept better at the cabin," she said. "Mom prepared it for that reason." And with that one sentence, the last harmless explanation I had been clinging to gave way underneath me. For a long second after Claire said it, nobody in the kitchen moved. The heater clicked once beneath the west window and fell silent again. The lake beyond the glass had gone that heavy lead color it gets before dark, when the water looks less like something living than something waiting. On the table between us lay Nora's card, in her neat, practical hand, the bus slips folded square beside it, the pharmacy stub, the old recipe envelope labeled soups/winter. As if what it held were still only instructions for weather. Claire sat with both hands wrapped around each other so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Daniel stood near the pantry, not leaning on anything, now his face emptied out in the way men's faces do when anger is trying to choose its shape. And I sat at my own table in my own house with my dead wife's handwriting inches from me, and understood that grief was no longer the largest thing in the room. I picked up the card again, though I did not need to read it a second time. If Evan wakes frightened. Warm milk first, 1/2 ginger lozenge if throat tight. Music box once, not twice. Let him talk crooked until it straightens out. Do not correct the order of what he says. Do not correct the order of what he says. The sentence burned. Because it was so specifically Nora, yes. Because I could hear her voice in it. But more than that, because it was written against something. Not against nightmares. Not against childish fussing. Against correction itself. Against a child so used to being managed that even fear had to be allowed out in the shape it arrived. I set the card down very carefully. How many times, I asked. Claire looked at me and then away. "I don't know. That isn't an answer. I know it isn't." "How many times were you here with him?" She swallowed. "Over the years, I don't know, Dad. Give me a number." Enough that Mom stopped calling it an emergency. The sentence went through me clean and cold. I looked toward the pantry because I could not look at her for a moment. The shelves were half in shadow now. Soup labels glowed dull in the fading light. The little domestic order of the place felt changed again, not simply used, not simply hidden, organized around necessity. "Did she tell you not to tell me?" I asked. Claire's eyes filled, but she did not cry. "Not like that." "Then, like what?" "She said you would come if I said I needed you." She never doubted that. Claire's voice had grown thin. She doubted how much evidence you would need before you believed what kind of needing it was. Daniel turned away sharply and looked out toward the lake, jaw locked. I felt something in me start to harden, not into rage, not yet, and not into self-defense either. Hardening like wood in cold, a gathering of grain. "What exactly did your mother believe?" I asked. Claire took a breath. That Mark had a way of making every room belong to his reading of it. Nobody spoke. "He didn't have to shout," she said. "That's the thing. If he'd shouted more, maybe it would have been simpler. He just—" She pressed her fingers against her eyes once and lowered her hand. "He'd answer what I meant before I meant it. If I was upset, he'd tell me why I was really upset. If Evan got jumpy or loud, Mark would say he needed consistency. If I wanted space, he'd call it avoidance. If I wanted quiet, he'd call it withdrawal. After a while, everything had his definition on it before I opened my mouth. I heard Nora, again standing at the sink years ago, how long it takes a child to be told to hurry before hurrying turns into fear. I had thought she was being poetic. I had spent a marriage with a woman whose warnings came dressed as observations, and I had loved her well enough to admire that habit without always taking its measure. "Why the school address?" Daniel asked, still looking out the window, voice flat. Claire closed her eyes. There were mornings. Mornings. What mornings when I did not want Evan going back from here before school, or nights when I got here too late to get him back and do bedtime twice. She opened her eyes. "Mom knew someone in transportation years ago. She said if we structured it cleanly and quietly, then at least if I needed the cabin, I wouldn't have to choose between safety and his attendance. Linda Kessler's voice came back to me. Families do not build a second school route by accident. Did Mark know that Daniel asked? Claire hesitated a fraction too long. Yes, she said. And he said if it kept things orderly. Fine. Orderly. That word in his mouth made my hands curl against the table. I thought of every dinner I had sat across from Mark Harlan while he passed rolls, asked after work, complimented Nora's roast, and discussed traffic patterns or school bond issues in that even reasonable tone of his. I thought of how often I had privately found him a little too polished, a little too eager to smooth feeling into policy, and how often I had dismissed that dislike as generational irritation. A father's ordinary wariness around the man who marries his daughter. I had not wanted to be that father. The suspicious one, the intrusive one, the man who mistook style for danger because he could not bear his daughter's adulthood. So I had chosen trust where vigilance was needed and called it decency. When you say he knew, I said, I want to know what that means. Claire twisted her wedding ring once, then stilled it with her thumb. It means if I said Evan and I were coming here, he didn't stop us. That's not the same as not causing it, Daniel said. Daniel, I said. No, Dad. No, we're not doing the part where we all keep phrasing this like weather. Claire flinched, but only slightly. What did he say when you took Evan here, I asked. She laughed once without humor. Usually, something generous, something that made it sound like he was allowing me rest. If you think he needs a break, go ahead. If your mother wants to help, I won't stand in the way. Maybe the lake will settle him. Always as if the idea had become reasonable once it came through him, the room felt smaller. Did he ever come get you, I asked. Her eyes met mine. Once. That single word changed the air. When? The winter after Mom died. Here. She nodded. Daniel turned from the window. What happened? Claire rubbed her palms once over her thighs, a small anxious motion I had not seen since she was a girl trying to tell the truth about a broken dish. He came after dark. Evan had finally fallen asleep in the back room. I had him down with the music box and warm milk and one of Mom's blankets. Mark stood right there in the mudroom and talked softly so he wouldn't wake him. The mudroom, the scuffed floor, the lower hook rubbed clean. The bench. All at once, the room behind me seemed to acquire another shape in memory, a threshold where calm had entered like a weapon. What did he say, I asked. Claire's voice dropped. That I was making normal life harder by dramatizing it. That Evan was watching me and learning that his feelings set the household agenda. That Mom had always indulged fear in a way he considered unhelpful. Nora. Unhelpful. I nearly laughed from the obscenity of it. He said that, in this house, I asked. Claire looked down. In the mudroom. The house shifted again around me. Not literally. Never literally. But one of the central humiliations of adulthood is learning that places you thought belonged to love had also hosted things you were never meant to see. I pushed my chair back and stood. Neither of them stopped me. I do not think either one knew whether I intended to leave the room or put my fist through something. I wasn't sure myself until I reached the mudroom and stood in the doorway with one hand on the trim. There it was. The bench under the hooks, the little striped hat, the floorboards with the fresh repeated scuff marks, the flashlight on the shelf, the closed door to the outside where a man had once stood speaking gently enough not to wake a sleeping child while telling my daughter that fear was indulgence. I put both hands on the bench and bent my head. Nora had been right in ways I had not let myself understand. Not because she was clairvoyant. Not because she had solved every question before the rest of us knew to ask it. But because she had never required a bruise to recognize coercion. She had understood something I had not, that a house can grow dangerous by and the bills still get paid, and the man causing it still speaks softly in the doorway. Behind me, Claire said very quietly, "Dad." I straightened. The choice I made in that moment did not feel dramatic. It felt overdue. "Sit down," I said. When I went back into the kitchen, I did not sit immediately. I walked to the counter, switched on the lamp over the sink, though there was still a little daylight left, and then turned on the smaller lamp by the desk alcove too. Warm pools of light came up around the room and left the corners darker, which somehow made it easier to think. Easier to see the table as a work surface rather than an altar. Daniel understood the shift before Claire did. He moved to the desk alcove, found the legal pad he had brought, and set it beside the invoices without being asked. "We build the timeline now," I said. Claire looked at me as if she did not recognize my voice entirely. "Dad." "No." I took Nora's card and slid it gently aside, then spread the delivery slips flat. "You've had years to protect whichever parts of this story you thought needed protecting. I am done being the last person in my own family to know what house we're standing in." Daniel nodded once. Claire lowered her eyes, then reached into her coat pocket and set her phone on the table. "I don't know everything in order. You know enough to start." So we began. Winter after winter, not every week, not even every month, but often enough that a pattern emerged. The first day Claire could clearly date was the late February, before Nora's diagnosis turned bad. Evan had been 8. There had been a school holiday. Mark had gone through a stretch at work that, in Claire's words, made him extra exacting. The house felt narrowed. Evan started waking before dawn with stomach aches on school days. Nora suggested the cabin for 2 nights. Claire resisted. Then went. "Why did you resist?" I asked. Claire gave me a look so tired it nearly undid me. Because I knew what it meant if it helped. The second stay. The third. A long weekend in November. 3 nights after Christmas one year, when everyone else believed Claire and Evan had the flu. A Monday to Wednesday stretch during spring testing because Evan had started crying in the car before school and then apologizing for it. That apology, an 8-year-old apologizing for fear, landed on me harder than half the facts of the day. We worked through the invoices. We matched dates to memory. Claire remembered one storm so bad Nora had insisted on keeping extra batteries and lantern oil in the pantry. Daniel found the corresponding propane service tag. I pulled the old desk calendar from the shelf, and there, in Nora's handwriting, were ordinary notations that no longer looked ordinary at all. Milk. Check West Room blanket. Call MP about delivery. Bus confirm by Thursday. Ginger. The little domestic shorthand of marriage had become an archive of quiet triage. At one point, Daniel lifted the desk calendar and stared at a page for so long I looked over. "What?" He handed it to me. Under a February date in Nora's neat writing was one line, "If he starts ordering the feeling for them, leave." No names, no explanation, just the sentence. I knew at once she had written it after one of those times Mark corrected somebody's emotional meaning aloud. I could hear her saying it to Claire, maybe while loading the dishwasher, maybe while folding sheets, her tone practical, not inflamed. If he starts ordering the feeling for them, leave. I put the calendar down like it might bruise. "She wrote that for you," I said. Claire nodded. "And you still didn't tell me?" "No," she said. "I told Mom." The answer was plain, not cruel, and because it was plain, it cut more deeply than cruelty would have. Somewhere after 6, the light outside failed completely. Daniel went out to his truck for a flashlight and brought in a carton of sandwiches and 2 coffees he'd bought in town. None of us had thought to eat. The coffee went cold on the table while we worked. Claire managed half a sandwich as if chewing required conscious effort. I ate mechanically and tasted nothing again. It was nearly 7 when my phone buzzed. Mark. His name on the screen made Claire go rigid. Daniel saw it and looked at me. "Don't ignore it." I agreed, not because I wanted to speak to him, because from this point forward, everything mattered. I answered and put the call on speaker without warning either of them. Tom Mark said that same even tone, lightly warm, as if we were discussing basketball scores or a leaky faucet. Claire's car is at the cabin. Claire looked away. Yes, I said. A fraction of silence. Tiny, meaningful only because I was listening now for tiny things. All right, Mark said. I figured as much. I called the house and got no answer. She's here. Another tiny pause. He was calibrating. I could hear it. Not uncertainty. Computation. Is Evan with her? He asked. No. Claire's head turned sharply toward me, startled, but I kept my gaze on the bill file in front of me. Evan was at a friend's overnight birthday thing Claire had arranged days ago, one of the few mercies in the situation. All right, Mark said again. Would you have her call me? She'll call if she wants to. Silence now longer, then the gentlest possible laugh. Tom, I'm not trying to make trouble. I just like to know where my family is. My family? The phrase might once have sounded like responsibility. Tonight it sounded like ownership polished into manners. We're talking, I said. About... I let the silence answer. When he spoke again, his voice remained calm, but some tiny thread in it had tightened. If this is about the cabin paperwork, I can explain that. The kitchen went absolutely still. Claire looked at me. Daniel's expression changed in one hard, clean line. You can explain it, I repeated. Yes. How? Well, some years back, Nora wanted a backup arrangement in case Claire ever needed help with Evan up there. Delivery access, some school flexibility, that sort of thing. She asked me not to make a production out of it. He said Nora's name the way men use the names of the dead when they think the dead can still do social work for them. Did she? I said. She was worried Evan got overstimulated. You know how she was. My hand tightened around the edge of the chair. You know how she was. It was a masterful little sentence, diminishing and affectionate at once, making Nora sound loving, fussy, a little over-attentive, just enough to fold her foresight back into grandmotherly temperament. Claire closed her eyes. Tom Mark said if Claire's upset, I'd prefer not to do this through layers of family interpretation. I almost admired him. God help me, I almost did. Not the content, the technique, the sheer calm audacity of trying to seize authorship of the room through a phone line. We'll be in touch, I said, and ended the call. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Daniel said, school flexibility. He knows. Claire said faintly. I looked at the black screen of my phone and felt something settle in me that had not been there this morning. Not certainty, not yet complete, but direction. A line. Mark had not denied the system. He had not sounded surprised. He had not reacted like a man hearing about a misunderstanding around a property he thought abandoned. He had stepped into explanation at once. You said he answered things too quickly, I said to Claire. She looked at me and nodded. He just did. Daniel pulled the legal pad closer and wrote in block letters, Knew about school. Used Nora as cover. No surprise. He underlined each once. The kitchen table had become a command center now. There was no other honest word for it. Bill slips, calendar, pantry receipts, legal pad. Nora's calm-down card, 2 cold coffees, my phone. The room looked like grief had finally admitted it needed strategy. Claire stared at the music box. I hate that it's here, she whispered. Why, I asked. Because it meant safety. The sentence sat there. Then she added, and because he knows that. I looked at the carved loon. The box had belonged to Nora, first as delight, then as family object, then as memory. Now it stood in another role entirely. A tool, a signal, maybe more than that. Nora had written music box once, not twice. Not sentimental then, procedural. When did she start using it with Evan, I asked. Claire wiped at her face, not crying so much as exhausted enough that water kept coming anyway. I don't remember exactly. Before she got really sick. Why once, not twice, Claire shook her head. She said once meant listen. Twice made him wait for the sound instead of speaking. Again, the simple practicality of it broke my heart open more efficiently than any dramatic gesture could have done. I rose and picked up the box. It had a nice weight in the hand. Solid. The carved feathers worn smooth where Nora's thumb must have rested. I turned it over. Felt the felt-lined base. One corner lifted slightly more than I remembered, as if the adhesive had been worked and pressed back more than once over the years. Daniel saw it the same instant I did. Dad? Claire stood halfway from her chair. I set the music box down gently and turned it over on a dish towel. The felt lining was old and grayed. One edge had separated enough that a fingernail could slip beneath it. For a moment, I did not move. Because once I opened it, the box would stop being whatever scrap of uncomplicated memory it still retained. Then I thought of Nora writing "Do not correct the order of what he says," and I slid the pocket knife blade under the lifted felt edge. The adhesive came away in a soft, papery pull. Inside, between the wooden base and the felt, was a shallow cavity no thicker than 2 stacked quarters. In it lay 3 folded slips, a prepaid phone card with most of the numbers rubbed off, and a tiny key. No note, no explanation. Nora again. She never wasted language where a usable thing would do. Daniel let out a breath through his nose that was almost a curse. Claire pressed both hands over her mouth. I lifted out the slips one by one. 2 were bus route transfer confirmations with partial district coding, 1 in Claire's name as guardian reference, 1 under the alias Ellen Warren. The third was older and stranger. A handwritten list of emergency phone numbers reduced to first names and initials. D. Avery, M. Pike, L. Kessler, Pharmacy, Lakeside Market. Nora had not only prepared the cabin, she had built a map of people who could keep it functioning. I turned the tiny key between finger and thumb. "What's this for?" Claire stared at it, then looked toward the pantry. "Maybe the utility lockbox." "There's no lockbox," I said automatically. Her face changed. "There used to be." We all looked at one another then. There are few feelings uglier than discovering your own house has had a feature of survival in it that you managed never to notice because it did not belong to your version of the place. The utility closet sat just off the mudroom, narrow and dark, holding breaker panel, cleaning supplies, lantern, fuel, and the old cabin vacuum that had never worked quite right. I had been in it twice already that day. I had seen no box. Now, with the little key in my palm and the music box gutted on the table behind me, the closet seemed to wait. "I'll go," Daniel said. "No," I said. "I'll go." I do not know if that mattered tactically. It mattered to me, because some threshold had been crossed, and the man who stepped over the next one needed to be the husband Nora had worked around. The mudroom felt colder now, not because the temperature had dropped, because the room was no longer a room. It was a record of arrivals no one wanted acknowledged. I opened the utility closet. Shelves on the left, cleaning rags, paper towels, lantern fuel, propane manual, the breaker panel at the back, narrow space below. I crouched, flashlight in hand, and shone it under the bottom shelf. Nothing. Then I saw a fresh line in the dust along the right side wall where the paneling met the floor. Too clean, too straight. I set the flashlight down, reached in, and felt along the panel seam. Wood gave. Not much. A hidden catch. Number A. Cheap carpenter's latch inset flush enough to ignore if you were not looking for it. I inserted the tiny key. It turned. A slim panel swung inward. Behind it was not a box exactly, more a shallow cavity between studs lined with cedar scraps. Inside, a spare phone charger, 2 laminated school pickup cards in a zip bag, a small envelope of cash batteries, and 1 more card in Nora's handwriting. No names this time, just a sentence. "If you use this, replace it before you sleep." The practical tenderness of it nearly undid me in the dark closet. Even refuge to Nora required order, not for aesthetics, for the next frightened night, the next child, the next woman arriving late and cold with no time to think. Behind me, Claire made a small sound. I turned with the flashlight and saw her at the mudroom threshold, one hand against the trim. Daniel stood a step behind her, not crowding. The scene fixed itself in my mind with sick clarity. This same threshold, this same room. My daughter standing there years ago while Mark told her softly she was making life harder. And my wife, sometime later, building a hidden cavity into the utility wall like a woman installing an extra heart in the house. We brought everything back to the table. The cabin did not feel haunted. It felt engineered, quietly, lovingly, and under pressure. Every object we touched seemed to carry two temperatures, now the warmth Nora had put into it and the cold necessity that required it. Claire sat down hard, as if her legs had stopped taking instructions well. "I didn't know about that compartment," she said. "Then how did you get the cash and pickup cards?" Daniel asked. She looked up, blinking. "Mom would leave things out when she knew I was coming, or text me where." That answer gave me no comfort. It only enlarged the system. I sat across from them and began arranging the evidence in date order. Not because I believed neatness solved sorrow, because structure keeps panic from choosing the furniture. First, the earliest delivery slips, then the calendar notations, then the bus transfer confirmations, then the pickup cards, then the cash envelope still folded in Nora's square, decisive way, then the pharmacy stub, then the latest electric bill with Ellen Warren on top like a rotten bloom. As I worked, the night outside deepened. The west window turned into a black mirror, and in it I could see the three of us bent over the table, the music box open, the lamplight catching paper edges and tired faces. A family portrait no one would have wanted painted. At some point, Daniel called Marlene Pike. I knew Marlene by sight and voice, if not by deep acquaintance. She and her ex-husband had owned a small cleaning and turnover service for lake properties for years. And after the divorce, she kept doing odd jobs on her own, grocery drop-offs, key swaps, winter checks for older residents. Nora liked her. Said Marlene talked too much when she was nervous and never when it mattered. She answered on the fourth ring. Daniel kept it on speaker after asking. "Marlene," he said, "it's Daniel Avery." A pause. Danny. No one had called him that in years, except the women who remembered him with skinned knees. I'm at the cabin with Dad and Claire. A longer pause. I was wondering. Daniel went on very evenly, if you ever delivered groceries here for Mom. The silence that followed was answer enough, but he waited. Finally, Marlene said, "Well, sometimes. How often?" "Oh, honey, I don't know about often." I watched Claire lower her head. "Marlene," Danielle said, still careful. "I need this clean." Another pause, then a sigh. "For your mama?" "Yes." And then after. "For Claire, some too." "Nothing huge? Milk, soup, crackers, things like that? She'd call, or your mama would have already left the order." My hand stopped on the paper in front of me. "After Mom died," Daniel asked. "Yes." "For how long? Oh, Lord." Marlene sounded close to tears now, or close to shame. "A good while, off and on." "What were you told, that Claire needed quiet with the boy sometimes? That he settled better by the lake? That you all knew?" I closed my eyes. There it was. Another common mercy turned weapon. People assume the family knows what the family is doing. "Marlene," I said. Her voice changed at once. "Tom, did you ever see Mark here?" "No." "Did he know silence?" "Marlene." "I don't know what he knew," she said too quickly, then corrected herself. "I know he called me once." "No one moved?" "When I asked. That winter after Nora passed." "What did he say?" That if Claire ordered anything up there under the old arrangement, I was to keep receipts tidy and not make it into neighborhood talk. She inhaled. He said he was trying to preserve Claire's dignity. Preserve Claire's dignity. I almost admired the symmetry of it. The way coercive men borrow the language of care because it travels so well in public. Did you believe him? I asked. Marlene made a helpless sound. I believed Nora. And after she was gone, I thought if the arrangement helped the boy and the girl, maybe quiet was still helping. Her voice cracked a little. Tom, I am sorry. I looked at Nora's card on the table. Warm milk first. It's all right. I lied. No, not a lie. Not all right. But not for Marlene to carry alone. After the call ended, no one spoke for a long time. The trap was tightening now, not around Mark yet, but around the last excuses I had left for myself. Nora had not simply worried. She had organized. She had not simply suspected. She had contingency planned. She had built a support line, Marlene market deliveries, pickup cards, route slips, prepaid phone cash, and she had done all that while sleeping beside me. The pain of that was not theatrical. It was worse. It was domestic. It lived in drawers, envelopes, and pantry stock. In the practical humility of a woman preparing for nights she prayed would not come often, and then came often enough to require replenishment. At a little past 9, Claire's phone lit up. Mark again. She stared at the screen. Answer, I said. Her head came up. What? Answer. Dad. Put him on speaker. Daniel said nothing. His stillness was agreement. Claire drew in a breath and answered. Hi. His voice came through smooth and low. You all right? The question was pitched exactly right for anybody listening from outside the family. Not controlling. Concerned. I'm fine, Claire said. You're still at the cabin. Yes. A pause. With your father. Yes. And Daniel. Claire looked at the legal pad where his name sat in black block letters under the evidence list. Yes. All right, Mark said. I'm trying very hard not to make this adversarial. I wrote down his exact phrase. Then, don't, Claire said. Another small silence. I think we should talk in person, he said. This is the sort of thing that gets badly distorted over the phone. Of course it was. Of course the room must be re-entered, the emotional temperature reset under his hand, when I asked, leaning close enough that my voice would carry. The line went quiet for one beat. 2. Tom, he said then without a flicker. I didn't realize I was on speaker. Yes, you did, Daniel muttered. I ignored him. When I can drive up. Tonight, if that's best. I looked at the window. Black outside. The lake invisible now except where the moon laid a narrow sheen against it. Claire looked exhausted. Daniel looked ready to break something with exact precision. I looked at the table and saw not merely evidence, but architecture. We had more than we'd had this morning. Not enough yet. No, I said. Tomorrow. All right. His tone stayed careful. I'd appreciate a chance to explain the practical side of what Nora set up. There it was again. Nora as administrative cover. Nora as the anxious, well-meaning matriarch whose arrangements unfortunate men had only been trying to accommodate. I wrote that down too. We'll talk tomorrow, I said. After I ended the call, Daniel let out a breath. He wants to walk back into the room before we know enough. Yes, I said. Claire whispered. He always does better in the room. Not rage, not panic, just knowledge. That was its own kind of horror. I rose and began clearing one corner of the table. What are you doing? Daniel asked. Making copies. We don't have a copier. We have phones. We have folders. We have your legal pad. We have enough to keep him from reordering the room if we are not stupid. Both of them stared at me then, and I realized something had shifted not only inside me, but visibly enough for them to feel it. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam a fist. I did not say the sort of hard, cinematic sentence younger men think strength requires. I simply began assigning the work. Daniel, photograph everything again with timestamps, close and wide shots. Claire, write every date you remember being here after Nora got sick. Even if you're not certain, use the edge of the legal pad. I want memory dates and paper dates separated. Claire blinked once, then reached for the pad. I took the music box and after one moment of hesitation lifted the mechanism lid fully to examine the underside. No more hidden slips, but on the inner base, nearly rubbed away, Nora had penciled one word beneath the mounting plate. Breathe. I sat down again slowly. It was not a message to me. Not really. It was probably what she told Evan, or Claire, or herself. But it steadied me all the same. By 10:30, the table looked like an accountant's bad dream and a husband's indictment. We had 3 piles: documents, domestic evidence, remembered incidents. In the remembered pile, the same patterns kept repeating. Mark, softening every fear into inefficiency. Claire, altering plans to avoid his mood shifts. Evan, sleeping better here. Nora, watching, preparing, and never once apparently deciding the proof would satisfy me soon enough to risk open war. At some point, Claire went into the back room and did not come out for 10 minutes. I found her there, sitting on the edge of the bed, with the newer blue quilt gathered under both hands. "You should sleep," I said. She gave a short, tired laugh. "Here, yes." She looked around the room. I used to feel better the minute I crossed the threshold. I nodded once. And now, she looked at me. Now I feel like I brought a lie into it. "No," I said, "you brought a need into it." The lie was that the need was ordinary. She lowered her eyes then, and I saw her mouth tighten the way Nora's used to when somebody finally said the truest thing in the room. And she wasn't sure whether to be relieved or angry. It took so long. "I should have told you," she said. "Yes." The honesty of it surprised her into looking up. "I should have told you," she repeated. "Yes," I said again, "and your mother should not have had to make a second household inside this one in order to protect you from my standards of proof. That one landed on both of us." I watched her absorb it and knew I had at last said something truer than blame. She nodded once and looked at the quilt. He slept here. I know. He'd still wake up sometimes, but he'd go back down. I looked at the shelf with the paperbacks and the little watercolor sky Nora had always said was wrong in a tender way. "That's because your mother knew how to make fear stop performing." Claire covered her mouth with one hand and cried, then silently. Shoulders tight, body folded inward. I sat beside her on the edge of the bed and put my arm around her. Not because I knew what else to do, because I was her father, and some truths arrive years late but still arrive as duties. When she calmed enough to breathe evenly, I said, "Tomorrow he comes here." Her head lifted. "What?" "He wants the room. He wants the chance to explain." "Fine." Claire stared at me. "Dad, he is good at making things sound... I know." "No, I don't think you do." I turned and looked at her fully. "I do now." The sentence hung between us. Then I went on. "He has spent years entering rooms he believed belonged to his interpretation. Tomorrow he enters one that doesn't." Back in the kitchen, Daniel was still at the table. He had his coat off now, tie loose and sleeves rolled, looking older than he had that morning. He glanced up when he saw us. "She all right?" "No," I said, "but she will be more all right than she was yesterday." He accepted that. I laid out the plan as plainly as I could. Claire would text Mark in the morning and tell him she wanted to speak at the cabin. Daniel would stay. Linda Kessler would be on call and willing to put her transportation explanation in writing if necessary. Marlene, if pushed, would confirm her deliveries. We would not let Mark drift the subject into Nora's anxious temperament or family miscommunication. We would not argue abstractions. We would work from dates, slips, delivery records, pickup cards, the hidden compartment, the calm-down card. Claire's account would matter, but it would not stand alone for him to recast as exhaustion or oversensitivity. The room would be built before he entered it. Daniel listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "That's good." Good. It was not good. It was necessary. But I understood what he meant. Somewhere near midnight, we finally made up beds. Daniel took the sofa. Claire stayed in the back room. I went upstairs to the bedroom Nora and I had shared and undressed in the dark because I could not bear the sight of the room just then. I lay awake a long while listening to the cabin settle. A house that old is never fully silent. Heat shifts in pipes. Wood gives back the day's cold. A branch taps siding and then falls away. Usually those sounds had always comforted me here. They told me the place was itself, that it did not need anything from me but ordinary stewardship. Tonight, every sound seemed double. Not threatening exactly, instructive. The house felt full of uses I had not known. Not supernatural uses, practical ones, human ones. A cupboard that meant soup once and triage later. A music box that meant rain and then safety. A mudroom bench that meant boots, then escape. Even the heater clicking on and off had changed meaning. The very fact of warm air in the back room had once been an expression of love I assumed belonged to grief maintenance. Now I knew it had been maintained for frightened sleep. At some point I rose and went downstairs barefoot, moving by memory through the dark. The west window table was a dim shape in lamplight. I had left one lamp on low over the sink. The music box sat where we had put it back together, though the felt underside remained loose. I touched it once and thought of Nora's thumb pressing the carved back. Breathe. Then I noticed something through the window, not at the front. Along the side of the cabin near the utility wall, a thin beam of light moving once, then gone. I did not think. I moved. By the time I reached the mudroom and grabbed the flashlight, the cold had hit my bare feet through the floorboards. I eased the door open and stepped onto the porch in my socks, then down into the gravel without feeling it. The night had gone hard and black. The lake was only sheen. Trees stood up like ink. I clicked on the flashlight and swept it once toward the utility side wall. Nothing. Then a shape moved at the far edge of the woodshed. My heart gave one violent thud. I lifted the beam. A raccoon froze in the light, fat and insolent one paw on the stack of split kindling. For a second I nearly laughed from the force of the release. Then I heard another sound not outside. Inside. The soft scrape of the mudroom bench shifting. I turned so fast the flashlight beam swung wild across the siding and up through the porch posts. By the time I got back through the door, Daniel was already standing in the hallway half awake, one hand braced against the wall. What I swept the light across the mudroom. Nothing moved. Then I saw it. The utility closet door stood open 3 inches. I was certain, absolutely certain, I had shut it after replacing the hidden compartment panel. Daniel followed my gaze. "Did you leave that note?" He did not say it was the raccoon or a draft or old hinges. He knew better. Not because we believed in ghosts, because houses disturbed by people stay disturbed by people. I crossed to the closet and opened it fully. The shelves looked the same. Paper towels, lantern fuel, breaker panel, but below on the floor the tiny cedar-lined panel stood slightly ajar. Someone had opened it after we went to bed. My mouth went dry so fast it hurt. Daniel came beside me. "Claire." I shook my head at once. "She doesn't know I'm down." She went straight to bed. He crouched and shone the flashlight lower. The contents were still there. Cash envelope, pickup cards, charger, but the zip bag sat at a different angle than I remembered. "Not much. Enough." "You think someone was in here?" he whispered. "In the house," I whispered back. The word house sounded wrong now, too soft. I did not answer because I did not have one that would not sound theatrical or foolish. Maybe Claire had come out after all. Maybe I had left the panel unlatched. Maybe exhaustion was beginning to blur my certainty. Maybe. Then, from the darkness of the kitchen, calm, as if the cabin itself had decided to speak in another man's voice, came Mark's. "If the heat cycles overnight, the mudroom always gets a draft under that latch." Daniel and I turned at once. Mark stood just beyond the table in the low lamplight, hands empty, coat still on, composed as church. And in that single casual sentence, before anything else was said, he revealed that he knew the cabin heating schedule far too well for a man who claimed it had been empty. For one suspended second after Mark spoke out of the dark kitchen, I had the absurd animal certainty that if none of us moved, the house might reject him on its own. He stood just beyond the table with the low lamp catching one side of his face and leaving the other in shadow, coat still on, hair neat, no visible hurry in him at all. That was the first thing that made him monstrous in the room. Not anger, not force, composure. The composure of a man stepping into a place he believed he could still define. Daniel straightened beside me so fast, the utility closet door bumped the wall. "What the hell are you doing in this house?" he said. Mark did not look at him first. He looked at me. "I didn't mean to startle anyone," he said. That almost made me laugh. The sentence was so exact to him. Not I shouldn't be here. Not I owe you an explanation. Only a tidy apology for the inconvenience of being caught. "You came in here with a key," I said. He gave the smallest nod. "An old one. Nora gave it to me during the winters in case pipes froze or Claire needed help." Claire had come partway down the hall and stopped. She wore Nora's old blue robe over her clothes, the one she always reached for when she stayed here. In the lamp glow, her face looked 20 years older than it had yesterday morning. She did not speak. She looked at Mark the way people look at an unexpected snake in a familiar garden. Not from surprise alone, but from the sick recognition that the thing had always preferred cover. Mark turned his voice toward her without turning his body fully, as if even his posture could keep the room under his reading. "I called," he said. "You didn't answer." Claire said nothing. I stepped away from the closet and into the kitchen proper. "You knew the latch under the utility wall would lift when the heat cycled." He held my gaze. "I've been here enough to know the place." There it was. No stumble, no denial. He heard what he had admitted, and for the first time I saw the faintest flicker of recalculation in his face. Very faint, the tiniest inward shift, like a man feeling a stair underfoot that is slightly lower than expected. Daniel moved toward the table. "You've been here enough to know the place you and Claire both told Dad was empty for years." Mark finally looked at him. "I told your father no such thing. That was another one. Not I didn't lie. I told your father no such thing." Narrow phrasing, usable phrasing. The sort of sentence meant to make everybody else do the sloppy work of their own assumptions. Claire wrapped the robe tighter around her. "Mark." Her voice was barely above breath, but the minute he heard it, he shifted his attention to her with that smooth, ready concern I had once mistaken for kindness. "Claire, I'm trying to keep this from becoming something uglier than it needs to be." I saw her shoulders change when he said it. Not much. A tightening, a drawing in. There it was in plain view now, the thing Nora had seen before I let myself see it, how his softness could function like a hand around the back of the neck. "No," I said. He looked at me. "No what?" "No more, beginning with your definition." Something passed across his face then. Not anger, irritation at losing sequence. I walked to the west window table and pulled out a chair. "Sit down." Daniel looked at me sharply, but I shook my head once. Not because I wanted Mark comfortable, because I wanted him lit, seated, inside the full sight of the room he had mistaken for his. Mark did not move. "Tom," he said, "this is late, and I think everybody here is operating at the outer edge of their emotions." That was how men like him always said it. Never, "You're upset." Always, "Everybody." Diffuse the center, make feeling a weather system, become the only adult carrying an umbrella. I put my hand flat on the table beside Nora's open music box. "Sit down." I said again. This time he did. Not because I overpowered him, because he thought sitting would give him the stage. Claire remained by the hallway entrance until I turned to her and said, "Come to the table." For one terrible second I thought she might not. Not out of disobedience, out of habit. Years of calculating what version of a room cost least. Then she came slowly and sat in Nora's chair by the desk alcove, hands in her lap, eyes on the papers. Daniel stayed standing, one shoulder against the pantry door frame. The house held itself around us. Heater ticking softly. Wind brushing the siding, the kitchen lamp laying amber light over invoices wrote. Slips, the hidden compartment cash envelope, the legal pad with dates and names, and the tiny key by Nora's music box. Nothing in the room was dramatic on its own. That was the force of it. Every proof of what had been done here wore ordinary clothes. Mark saw the table and understood. I think that he had not walked into rumor. He had walked into order. "What is this?" he asked. "This," I said, "is the room exactly as you should have found it years ago if any of us had understood what Nora was trying to protect." His jaw changed. Again, only slightly. But enough. He looked at the music box, at the slips, at the legal pad. Then he folded his hands in front of him as if beginning a meeting. "All right," he said. "Then let me save us some distortion." Daniel let out one humorless breath that was almost a laugh. Mark ignored him. Nora was concerned about Evan's sensitivity. We all know that. She believed the cabin settled him. She asked me and later Claire to help maintain some flexible arrangements in case he needed breaks from routine or the school week got complicated. Delivery access, occasional transportation, accommodation, backup supplies. I understood it as a practical support structure. If that system continued after Nora passed, it was because Claire and Evan still benefited from it. He stopped there the way a careful man stops after laying out the cleanest version first, waiting to see what the room will accept. Nobody spoke. He looked at Claire. "If you had wanted your father involved in that, you could have said so at any point." There it was again. Not only control, delegation of blame. Claire lowered her eyes. I felt the old reflex rise in me to keep the temperature low, to prevent family damage by speaking gently to hold the center through moderation. I understood then that moderation had been one of the tools by which this all survived. "Do not do that here," I said. Mark turned to me. "Do but hand her the burden for your arrangement." His face stayed smooth. "Tom, with respect, this was not my arrangement. Nora drove it. My hands stayed flat on the table because I needed them flat. Nora prepared a refuge. She prepared flexibility. She prepared a refuge, I repeated, and heard for the first time that my voice was no longer asking the room's permission to hold truth in it, for her daughter, for her grandson, around a man who taught them to need one. For the first time that night, real cold came into his expression, not loud, not theatrical, just the withdrawal of charm. I think that is a very loaded thing to say in front of Claire. "No," I said. "What is loaded is teaching a child to apologize for fear, and then calling his grandmother indulgent when she noticed." Claire's breath caught. Mark's head turned slightly toward her. "Did you tell him that Daniel came off the pantry door frame? She doesn't need your permission to answer questions." Mark's eyes flicked to him and back. "I'm not asking permission. I'm asking whether private moments between spouses are now being reassembled into a prosecution." There it was, that word, private, as if privacy were what mattered, not what had been protected inside it. I leaned forward a little. "No," I said. "What is happening is that we are finally naming what sort of privacy required a hidden address. A second school route cache in the utility wall pantry. Stock rotated after my wife was dead, and a music box packed with transport slips." His eyes moved to the music box again. That mattered. He knew it. Nora put too much meaning into some things, he said carefully. That was one of her strengths and one of her weaknesses. For one suspended beat, I thought Daniel might actually come across the table at him. I held up one hand without taking my eyes off Mark, and Daniel stopped. My wife's weakness, I said, was believing she had more time to wait for the rest of us to catch up to what she saw. Something in Claire broke then, not into screaming. She sat straighter and lifted her head with the look of a person who has been slowly surfacing for hours and has finally reached air. "That's enough," she said. Mark turned fully toward her, and I saw the old pattern trying to reassemble. Concern first, correction second. "Claire, you are exhausted. You've been with your father and brother all day pulling objects into stories." "No," she said, and I could hear her voice shaking, but it did not weaken the sentence. "I've been with my father and brother all day putting stories back into the objects." Silence took the room whole. Mark's expression did not change much, but what changed mattered more than anger would have. He stopped trying to look wounded. That effort fell away. What remained was impatience. He leaned back in the chair. "All right," he said. "If this is where we are, then let's be adult. Evan is a sensitive child. He always has been. Nora over-identified with that because she found emotional language morally superior to structure. Claire." He gave the slightest, almost pitying shake of the head, never learned to separate discomfort from harm. So yes, the cabin became a place where those distinctions were allowed to blur. I accommodated that longer than I should have. There it was. Not the whole face yet, but bone beneath skin. The private contempt that had always lived inside the manners. Claire went very still. Daniel swore under his breath. And I, sitting there with the papers under my hands and Nora's open music box by my wrist, felt the last of my hesitation leave me. "You accommodated it," I said. "Yes." "Your wife and child needing a hidden second address." "I did not say they needed it." "No," I said. "You only benefited from saying so after." He looked at me evenly. Tom families survive by choosing which tensions deserve oxygen and which ones do not. Nora had a romantic relationship to oxygen. That sentence may have been the moment his mask fully collapsed for me. Not because it was loud, not because it confessed in any cheap, easy way, because it showed the whole engine. Everything filtered through his right to decide what atmosphere others got to live in. "You hear yourself," Daniel said. Mark ignored him. He kept his eyes on me because he still thought I was the room he had to win. "Your wife meant well," he said, "but she made sensitivity into governance. There's a reason households need one emotional center." Claire made a sound then, small like someone taking an unexpected blow to the chest. I looked at her and understood in a flash that she had heard some version of that sentence in one form or another for years. One emotional center. I stood up. No shouting, no pounding. I just stood, and because I stood, the room rearranged itself around me. "That," I said, "is the last sentence you will ever speak in this house, as if you belong to it." Mark's gaze hardened. "This is exactly what I was trying to avoid." "No," I said. "What you were trying to avoid was a room where every gentle phrase you own had to stand next to its consequences." I gathered the slips in my hand one by one as I spoke, not flourished, simply handled. "You told Marlene Pike to keep receipts tidy and not make this into neighborhood talk while you preserved Claire's dignity. You knew the transportation code on the cabin account because you knew the arrangement had become active enough to imprint. You knew the draft under the utility latch because you have been in this house enough to know what happens when the heater cycles at night. You knew Nora kept a hidden support system here, and you used her name to go on managing it after she died." Mark's voice lost the public warmth entirely. "That is a distortion." "No," I said. "This is chronology." I slid the delivery invoices across the table. Then the route slips. Then Nora's calm down card. Then the cash envelope and pickup cards from the cedar-lined wall compartment. Mark's eyes tracked each item with more care than he had shown Claire all night. Behind me, Daniel said, Linda Kessler will confirm in writing by morning that the alternate route structure wasn't incidental. Marlene's already confirmed deliveries. We've photographed dates. Pantry stock service logs. The height mark in the back room. You're done getting to describe this as concern. For the first time, Mark looked slightly uncertain, not morally, not internally, but procedurally. The kind of uncertainty men like him feel when a system no longer bends politely around them. Claire drew off her wedding ring and set it on the table. The sound it made was very small. Nobody moved for a second after that. Mark looked at the ring, then at her. You are not doing this because of a pantry and some school forms. No, Claire said. Her voice was steadier now than it had been all night. I'm doing this because I'm hearing out loud what I've been living inside. You are exhausted. She almost smiled then, but there was no humor in it. You always said that when I was nearest the truth. He leaned toward her slightly, and the old softness came back to his tone by force now, like a suit put on in a hurry. Claire, listen to me. Your father is grieving. Daniel has always disliked me. Your mother built systems because that was how she handled anxiety. We can have a real conversation tomorrow when this room has cooled down. I saw it happen in Claire's face, the old reflex trying to obey, then not obeying. No, she said again. This room has been too cool for too many years. He looked at me then, and whatever remained of his public mask was gone. Not in volume, in permission. He no longer needed to seem good. He needed to regain ground. You really want to know what happened, he asked. It was the first dangerous sentence of the night because it came without softening. I nodded once. He sat back. What happened, he said, is that Nora decided she knew my family better than I did. She treated every difficulty as proof of damage because she preferred the role of rescuer. Claire learned that if she looked overwhelmed, your wife would build a cushion under it. Evan learned that fear earned a different set of rules. And you... He gave me a thin look, not angry, simply dismissive. You were absent in exactly the way men like you often are. Useful, ethical, revered, and never in the room long enough to feel what daily maintenance costs. Claire whispered, "Stop." He did not. So yes, a parallel system formed. Because somebody had to keep the actual household functional while the rest of you romanticized distress. That was it. The whole architecture spoken cleanly enough that even he could not pull it back. Not a husband forced into patience. A man who believed the emotional life of everyone around him existed to be disciplined into usefulness. I placed both hands on the table and leaned slightly toward him. My wife, I said, did not romanticize distress. She recognized it before it had permission to become spectacle. She saw that my grandson was being taught to mistrust his own fear. She saw that my daughter had started changing the order of her sentences before she finished them. She saw that your idea of function required a child to sleep under a second address and a woman to keep cash in a wall. And because she was braver than I was quicker, she built what this house needed until I was finally able to see it. No one breathed. Mark stared at me. I went on quieter now because quiet was mine again and no longer his. You do not get to call yourself the stabilizing force in a family that required a hidden refuge to survive your version of stability. That was the hero moment, though I did not think of it that way then. It was not triumphant inside me. It was clarifying, like stepping finally into the exact depth of cold water you had spent years wading toward without admitting it. Mark's face changed one last time. Whatever smoothness he had left thinned into something colder than anger. You think this ends well, he said. No, I said. I think it ends honestly. Claire stood up. I want you to leave, she said. He looked at her as though the room had betrayed him. Claire. No. Her voice shook once and then steadied again. No more private explanations. No more telling me what my life means after I've lived it. I want you to leave. He remained seated. Daniel moved away from the pantry at last and came to stand beside Claire, not touching her, simply present. Mark looked at him and gave a tiny contemptuous smile. You've always wanted to make yourself the emergency. Daniel's face did not change. And you've always relied on that sentence. I picked up my phone. Tom, Mark said. I met his eyes. If you do not stand up and walk out of this house in the next 10 seconds, I call the sheriff and tell him you entered after midnight with a retained key into a property where you are no longer welcome and where your wife has just asked you to leave. He heard the difference in me then. No theatricality, no bluff, just consequence. He stood. For one foolish moment, I thought he might reach for the papers or the ring or the music box. Instead, he buttoned his coat, looked at Claire, then at me. This is not over, he said. No, I answered. It's only no longer hidden. He walked to the mudroom. There he paused one hand on the frame and said without turning, The boy will not thank you for making his life less structured. It was such a bare sentence, so unadorned by care, that even Claire did not flinch this time. She only looked tired. Deeply, newly tired. The tiredness that comes after fear leaves and consequence arrives. He already has, I said. Mark left, the door shut behind him with the ordinary wooden sound doors make when men are gone and houses remain. No one moved for a long while. At last, Daniel went to the mudroom window and watched the gravel drive. We heard the car start reverse, pull away. Then Claire sat back down in Nora's chair and put both hands over her face. I did not go to her immediately. Some grief must be allowed to arrive before it can be held. So I stood at the table and looked at the spread of evidence under the lamplight and the black window beyond, and thought of Nora doing this alone in smaller pieces for years. Not the confrontation, the preparation, the knowing and not yet being able to prove. The stocking of shelves and hiding of cash and storing of pickup cards and half-ginger lozenges and music box once, not twice. When I finally sat beside Claire, she lowered her hands and said very quietly, I heard him. I know. No, I mean tonight. I heard him. She looked at the door to the mudroom. I've heard him before, 100 ways. But tonight, I heard him. Daniel came back from the window and sat on the corner of the table because he was too tired to care that Nora would have told him not to sit on furniture meant for food and paper. Good, he said, though not cruelly. Good. Claire gave him a wet half-laugh. You're impossible. I'm accurate. That broke some tiny sealed place inside the room, and for a few seconds the three of us nearly smiled at one another, the way families do at wakes when someone accidentally says something living. It passed fast, but it mattered. We did not sleep much the rest of that night. At 6:30, Daniel was on the phone with a family attorney in Columbus. He knew through work, not because he trusted work friends with his life, but because middle age teaches you which competent people return calls. By 8, Linda Kessler had emailed a clean factual statement about the transportation coding structure. By 9, Marlene Pike, pale and ashamed but steady enough, drove up with a manila envelope of old route slips and handwritten delivery notations she had kept because, as she put it, I don't throw away paper when paper might someday tell the truth better than I can. She sat at Nora's table, twisting the cuff of her cardigan, and told Claire she was sorry for every time she had mistaken discretion for help. Claire took her hand. You were part of getting us here. Maybe Marlene said. But I should have asked harder. We all should have, I said. I did not say it to ease her. I said it because by then I had lost interest in letting guilt travel selectively. Before noon, Claire and Daniel drove to pick up Evan from the birthday sleepover. I remained at the cabin and changed every lock I could change. It was work I should have hired out at my age, crouching in cold doorways with screwdrivers and old knees and a neck that complained each time I bent too long. But I needed the labor, needed the blunt, honest rhythm of removing hardware touched by one meaning and fitting hardware to another. New deadbolt at the mudroom, new front lock. Utility latch reinforced from the inside. Spare keys logged on Nora's old desk calendar in my own block hand, this time with names beside them and no shadows. The house watched me do it, That is the only way I can say it. Not mystically. A house used hard for love and secrecy takes note when the secrecy is stripped out. The rooms changed under the work. By afternoon, the cabin no longer felt like a concealed system keeping its breath held. It felt like a place enduring surgery. Claire returned with Evan a little after 3. He came in carrying an overnight bag and a paper party favor sack and looked at first glance like any 10-year-old boy who had slept badly away from home and needed a bath and ordinary food. Then he saw the adults' faces and grew careful in the way children do when they have been trained to read rooms before they enter them. That look alone was enough to steady every decision I had made. "Hey, buddy," I said. He glanced at me, then at his mother. "Hi, Grandpa." Claire crouched and put both hands on his coat. "You're staying here with me a few days." He looked past her at the kitchen, the west window table, the music box. "Okay," he said too quickly. "No," I said gently. "Not okay. Just true." He looked at me again, uncertain. I sat in a chair rather than stand over him. "Nobody's mad at you." "I know. You don't have to know that fast." He blinked. Claire covered her eyes for a second and lowered her hand. Daniel looked away toward the lake. Evan came farther in, set his bag down by the bench. Then he saw the striped knit cap still on the shelf and his face changed. Not fear, not exactly. Recognition without disguise. "You found my winter hat," he said. It was the most ordinary sentence of the day. "Yes," I answered. "I thought it was still here." "So did I." He nodded, and with that nod, something in the house gave back a little of its air. The days that followed were full of practical misery, which is different from drama, and often harder to endure. Lawyers, school calls, Claire making lists of what she needed from the Harlan house and what she could afford to leave behind for now. Daniel coordinating with a deputy friend of a friend so that one retrieval of essential belongings could happen without theater. Mark sending messages that began reasonable, turned injured, then cooled into procedural. We saved them all. He did not come back to the cabin. That, too, told its own truth. Men who believe rooms belong to them rarely re-enter after a room has named them correctly. Nothing resolved cleanly. Temporary orders are not the same as peace. Children do not become unafraid because paperwork improves. My relationship with Claire did not mend in one conversation or 2 or 6. There were still places where she looked at me, and I could feel the years of her withholding laid between us like boards in an unfinished floor. I had to step carefully and earn each one. But the cabin changed. Openly now, not covertly. Marlene delivered groceries in daylight and came through the front door with them. Daniel installed brighter exterior lights and muttered at the old wiring until I told him not every problem in the world required a cordless drill. Claire washed the back room quilt and hung it on the line. I restocked the pantry this time with no hidden compartments governing the order. Still Nora's sequence because order was not the enemy, but not secretly. On a yellow card, I wrote in my own hand and taped it inside the utility closet. Keys with Tom. No hidden entries. If you need help, ask aloud. I stood looking at that card longer than I care to admit. One evening, 3 days after Mark left, I found Claire at the sink where Nora used to peel apples. She was staring out at the lake with one hand around a mug she had forgotten to drink from. "Your mother said some houses make it easier to breathe," I said. Claire looked at me. "I remember," she said. I should have asked what she meant. "Yes," she said. And because we were finally an honest country, she added, "But I should have answered sooner, too." That was the closest thing to mutual forgiveness we could manage then. It was enough to keep building from. The first real night came a week later. By real, I mean the first night the cabin felt like a place people were living in without staging it as either emergency or shrine. Daniel had gone back to Columbus for work and promised to return Friday. Marlene had dropped off milk and bread and left without apologizing 3 times. Claire had showered and gone to bed early with a headache. The heater had settled into its familiar winter click. Outside the windows, the lake lay black and flat under a clean sky, and the porch light threw a shallow gold onto the railing Nora had painted with her sleeves rolled up and a cigarette tucked behind one ear in 2003 because she said nice railings were wasted on polite hands. Evan and I sat at the west window table. He had warm milk at his elbow in Nora's old stoneware mug with a chipped rim. I had coffee gone half cold. Between us sat the Loon music box. For days I had not wound it, not because I wanted to preserve it, because I had needed it to settle into its new meaning, or perhaps into all its meanings at once. Evan looked at it and then at me. Grandma used to do it once. I know. Not twice. I know that too. He nodded. Then he traced the table grain with one finger. If you did it twice when I was upset, she'd say I was listening to the wrong thing. I swallowed once. That sounds like her. He glanced toward the hall to make sure his mother was out of earshot. Children who have lived inside correction do that automatically. You can talk straight here, I said. He looked back at me. You don't have to check the room first. He did not answer. Then after a moment he said, I know. No, I said gently. You know in your head. I'm talking about your body. That seemed to surprise him a little. Maybe because old men are not supposed to know such things. Maybe because my wife had taught me after all, even if she had to teach me in installments. I reached out and rested my thumb on the carved back of the loon the way Nora used to. Then I wound it once. The melody came out thin and a little cracked from that dry winter air. Not pretty exactly. Familiar. That was better. Evan listened with his eyes on the table. When it ended, the heater clicked on under the window and sent its first warm breath into the room. He said in an ordinary voice, Dad used to tell me if I said things in the wrong order, people wouldn't know what I meant. I kept my hands around my mug. What do you think now? He thought about that. Really thought. I think Grandma knew the order wasn't the point. No, I said. It wasn't. He nodded and kept going. Not all at once, not in some miraculous spill of healing truth. Children are not faucets, and fear does not become eloquence because adults finally behave well. He talked the way Nora had written he should be allowed to talk crooked until it straightened out. About mornings that felt too bright. About the way his father would say calm down before he had even finished being startled. About how the cabin smelled like wood and cocoa and didn't make his stomach hurt. About the back room blanket. About the night Grandma told him some places were for sleeping and some places were for telling the truth, and lucky houses could do both. I listened, that was all. I listened and did not reorder him. Outside, wind moved lightly over the lake. Inside, the baseboard heater clicked and settled. Nora's music box sat between us. No longer a hidden device, no longer evidence, no longer merely memory. It was what it had always been at its best, a way of making space. When he finished, he did not look exhausted or relieved or transformed. He looked like a boy at a table in a warm kitchen with an old man who had finally learned not to hurry him. I looked around the room then, at the pantry door with its honest shelves, at the mud room beyond new lock catching the lamplight, at the utility wall concealing nothing now except wiring and weather, at the west window gone black with night reflecting the table back at us, at the chair where Nora used to sit empty and not empty. The cabin was no longer hidden safety. It was shelter spoken aloud. The music box gave out its last thin note, and beside me my grandson kept talking in the dark without whispering.